I just want to do God's will.
The kind of revolution that the world needs is a Christian revolution.
If you want a miracle, you've got to expect it to happen.
You are the recipients of God's grace and God's blessings, and you rejoice in that reality.
Welcome to Life Today Live. Great to have you on the program today. And all of us have a unique ability. We're all different, and that's what makes humanity beautiful in many ways, and sometimes difficult in many ways. But when you look at it spiritually, God has given everybody gifts, and that goes for everybody. And you'll see it. People that don't give their gifts to God, they still can have success with the things that God has given them. Different personalities, different abilities. We are not, blessedly, we are not all the same. So when it comes to yourself, you look at yourself and you go, okay, sometimes it's hard to spot. I think sometimes the hardest people's gifts to see are your own sometimes. And that's why community is good. Wisdom is good to get into your community, because people can say, you know what, I think you can go here. And that's much of life. But when you're a believer, you're one of those called by God, and you start to go, okay, how do I find that thing in my personality, that natural inclination, that gift? How do I use that for God's glory? Well, now you're talking whole new level. And we're going to talk about that today. My guest is Ben Pilgreen. He's a pastor of Epic Church in beautiful downtown San Francisco. And he has a book that just dropped this week. It's called Bring It Out. And he's going to tell us how to cultivate the unique gifts and assignments that we've all been given. So I do believe this will be a very beneficial conversation for you guys, and I'd love you to share it with other people that you know will benefit from this. Hopefully we'll grow a little bit spiritually and maybe learn to see some things in yourself that, I don't know, maybe you hadn't seen. So appreciate you guys being here. Ben, great to have you on the program. Welcome to Life Today Live.
What a privilege to be here. Thank you for this opportunity.
So, oh man, where do we start? Okay, let's just hit it. I mean, I like to talk about your city and all that, and I think people are curious, actually. How is ministry in downtown San Fran these days?
Well, San Francisco it has never been boring, and that is true today. I think one thing to say is that a lot of what you do see on the news is true. Like, this is the news of what's happening in the city. But there are so many other stories that aren't being told. We all know what it is that sells. And so I'm getting to live in a really beautiful story, not an easy story, but just we are seeing so much momentum, so much spiritual fruit in our church, atheists coming to faith, entrepreneurs and tech leaders and business leaders understanding that they have been given the gifts that you just mentioned, and they're starting to use it for God's glory and for the good of other people. And it's really wild to us how much momentum is present. So the city is certainly broken. And to your point, it is also quite beautiful. And but I will say, like, it's never boring. I was on the train 2 days ago, and a woman came on the train, and I've ridden the train for like 13 years, and she brought her own pet snake onto the train. And I'm thinking, yeah, it's never boring here. Randy, when we moved here, it was like, I cannot believe we have to pay to park everywhere. Now I'm like, hey, here's a $20 bill. Just give me a spot. So it's wild. Our church meets in 11,000 square feet in a basement in downtown, but our rent is $45,000 a month. So everything that I learned elsewhere, when I talk to my pastor friends around the nation, they're like, wait, help me understand. And you guys reimburse $10 for everyone who parks in the parking garage. Yeah, so it's just a whole different framework. Raising kids here I've got 4 children between 16 and 20. So we've literally raised our kids here. And I like to say, if they do survive here, they'll be able to do anything anywhere in the world.
Yeah, no kidding. Now, are you originally from Louisiana? You mentioned relatives.
I grew up in Louisiana. My wife grew up in Georgia. So both of us grew up in the South. But
you should be used to snakes.
Fair enough. People are like, wait a minute, you didn't have alligators or go hunting or fishing that much growing up. That's a true story.
Right. All right. So now you can see where Ben's got a unique perspective. So let's talk about this idea of spiritual gifts. And, yeah, my background, growing up Southern Baptist, but then going to Oral Roberts University.
Yeah.
I got married in the United Methodist Church. I'm Presbyterian now. And it's funny because you hear more about spiritual gifts in the charismatic circles, but none of the other ones deny that, But where are you coming from, just when you approach the whole topic?
Yeah, this idea. I mean, for starters, it's like God not only created us uniquely, to your point in the intro, but He is, for every genuine believer, we've been given at least one spiritual gift. And I think so often we want to compare ourselves, or we think like that God has favorites, but I love that line from Paul in 1 Corinthians 12. He's like, no, we're not all eyes, we're not all hands, we're not all feet. Mm-hmm. We are all equal parts, and we need to give honor to the parts that tend to not be seen. But you know how this is. I mean, those of us whose gifts put us on platforms cause a lot of people to put us on pedestals that they don't need to. And so, some of us have very public gifts, and some of us have gifts that impact what looks like thousands of people. Others of us have gifts that are behind the scene, and we feel like, and I think, Randy, if we're not careful, we end up apologizing for the way we've been made, as if that's a negative reflection on us. But if I didn't make myself and I have a creator, and I'm apologizing or complaining about the way I've been made, who's that a negative reflection on? It's a negative reflection on the God who made us. And so I think we need to drop the language of I'm just a fill in the blank, or my gifts are only fill in the blank. And I think, man, God has put stuff in us. What we want to do is, the most significant thing we can do is whatever God's called us to do. And the most significant gift I can have and you can have is the one God actually gave me.
How do you differentiate between a spiritual gift and sort of personality? In other words, some people are born natural athletes. I was not one of them. Some people, I was born with a right. I was born with a bent towards music and writing and some of the arts, But how is that different necessarily from a spiritual gift?
Yeah, I believe that God has given and deposited natural abilities into every single human. And one of the things, even with this book, I'm hoping, and I've already seen God use the message to reach people who don't share our faith yet, to say, hey, God still wired you in particular ways, and you're still meant to bring good out into the world. Mm-hmm. But when the Holy Spirit is given to us, that comes with gifts. And I think it's also important to remember that when I have a spiritual gift, it is only operating in its full power when I am being empowered by the Holy Spirit. So I think we've got to be careful that we don't allow our gifts to take us to a place where our life with God isn't sustaining those gifts. You and I have seen so many people that start off like, wow, God gave me a gift. They're humble, they're grateful, they're dependent. And, then we allow, people's applause for our gifts to take us to a place where we think we no longer need God's help. And, and then we're operating on these platforms in different ways, but we don't have, it's really out of the flesh. And we both have seen what that does to people.
It's called a fall usually, unfortunately, you and I, we've been around enough pastors that we've seen a very gifted speaker and someone who's smart, and that dependency. So, okay, that raises, I think, a really critical question, which is how do we maintain that sense of dependency on God while at the same time maximizing the gifts and abilities that He has given us?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to remember where our story started. So these days, I am speaking a lot to mostly highly influential people here in San Francisco, and I have the privilege of coaching business leaders. So I could say that and tell you, oh, that's very impressive, but I know where my story began. When I was a freshman in college, I majored in marketing, so I was in the College of Business. We had to take an introduction to public speaking class. We had to give a 5-minute speech. That was the first assignment of the entire semester. I got so scared to give that speech that I didn't show up at class the next morning. Not only did I not show up the next morning, to this day, I have never been back to that class. So, Randy, I'm dropping public speaking. Because I'm unwilling to do that class, I have to leave the College of Business.
Oh, wow.
So I need to remember, like, all of us have something in our story that should keep us humble, but not hold us back. So when I am tempted to go, wow, look at our church growing, or look at, oh, we published a book, or I'm speaking it, it's like, no, I know where this started. This started with me dropping a public speaking class, having to leave the School of Business, and now I spend, almost 100% of my week creating content and coaching business leaders, even though I no longer, I did not get a business degree. So it's just, I think sometimes it's God's humor, but it's also like, hey, what's in your story? A lot of us need to remember there's stuff in our story that should keep us humble, and other people need to hear, who aren't confident, they need to hear, hey, just because that's in your story, don't let it hold you back from whatever God wants to do.
Okay, well, all right. So, Epic Church members, your pastor's a dropout, just so you know. But you actually raise a very important point because, nature, nurture, whatever. We look at someone who's been traumatized. This is someone who has had negative things in their past.
Yes.
All of us have negative things in our past to some degree, some, more traumatic than others. But how do we get past our past and step into the full operation of whatever gifts God has given us? Because that's a major deal.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much trauma literally living in people's minds and bodies. I do think there's extensive healing that has to happen for so many humans today, which is unfortunate. I think about that, the line, though my mother and father forsake me, the Lord will receive me. And I think a lot of people had, whether it was an actual mother or father or coaches or teachers or even people in their faith communities that didn't do for them what they should have been doing for them. So I think to the extent that damage has been done, that's going to be how much healing we need. My wife Shauna and I have 3 biological sons, and we adopted our daughter from India at age 9. She's 18 now, and without going into details for lots of reasons, she's had experienced tons of trauma. And so to your point, she needs a different kind of love and care than our boys did growing up because they were not exposed to some of the same things. But we believe, and have helped her to believe, we need people speaking into our lives. We act like there's too much encouragement going around. We need somebody to say, hey, I'm sorry you weren't loved. I'm sorry what's happened to you. But your life is not over. Your story's not over. And even for you, no matter what's there, God's put something into you. But I do think for a lot of us, we pray for things, which is great, but we need to receive them. So it's awesome to pray for forgiveness, but we need to receive forgiveness. I think about Paul's line in Philippians 3 that I've got to some degree, I've got to forget what is behind me so that I can press on into the new.
Right.
And my experience has been, and again, let's do if it's counseling, if it's intense therapy, community for sure, but I can't step into the thing God has for me if I'm still being held back by or holding on to the thing that did sabotage a previous season in my life. And I think so many of us we're forfeiting what could be because we won't let go of what's been so familiar. So leaving the familiar is a concept I hit on a lot because you can't step into what God has for you if you won't leave what He used to have for you.
Okay, so when you talk about the familiar in that regard, are you talking about even the good things, or are you talking about the traumatic things?
I think it can be both. I mean, you think about this, like when we read the Exodus account, you and I are thinking, how in the world would they be enslaved for 400 years in Egypt, be on a journey to the promised land, Canaan, and then out of their mouths, they're like, Moses, we would be better off if we could just go back to Egypt. And you and I are thinking, right. But this is like we the familiar can be brutal and we love it, or to your point, it can be good. And to remember, just because something was good for us in a previous season, we might need to leave that. There could be a new vocation or industry. Sometimes we need to just leave a familiar mindset because God wants to enlarge our mindset. So I think I'm just always asking people, hey, would you be willing to leave the things that have become again, some things we should never leave that are familiar, our faith, obviously our spouses, our children. But sometimes it's, most of life is seasons, and seasons don't last forever. But to step into a new season, I've got to be able to relinquish the season I've been in.
That's good. I love the illustration, the Exodus journey. My suspicion is that there were a couple of things that people didn't realize. Number one, they, having been in slavery and in Egypt, they did not realize the fruitfulness, the fulfillment, the beauty, all the things that were in the promised land waiting for them. They couldn't see it. And what they were having a hard time with, two things. One was the dependency on God that they suddenly found themselves having to rely on daily. And the other, I don't think they realized that they had to fight to get there. Because you read, Exodus and even in Leviticus, there's some brutal fights going on to get to the promised land. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of Christians, a lot of people come to faith and they think they go from slavery to sin to promised land. And it's like, no, you got to learn dependency on God.
Yeah.
And you got to learn to fight. I don't think people realize that. So anyway, all right. I want to ask you about a concept called the wisdom table that you talk about in the book, but I want to show people the book again real quick. This is Bring It Out by Ben Pilgreen. Looks just like this, available wherever you get books. Just out this week, so brand new. But this idea of a wisdom table, explain what you mean by that. I think that's important.
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked. Like, this is the concept. If somebody was like, what is the concept that's resonating most with people? I was privileged to have Pat Gelsinger, the CEO of Intel, write the foreword. And even in the foreword, this is what he comes on board with. This term, for me, is birthed out of a message I gave in July of 2017. We were walking through the book of Proverbs, and it was just a message I wrote. And then since, this concept of a wisdom table, it's just become part of the vernacular for people in our community and beyond. I'm hearing it around Silicon Valley, which is just really cool. But you and I know that every company, every nonprofit organization, if they do not have a board of directors, that's crazy. Or if they put foolish people in those board seats, and we have seen that. And so I'm just advocating for this idea, like if it's foolish for a company to not have a great board of directors, then gosh, our lives are so much more important than companies. And so often we don't have any advisors speaking into our lives, or we don't have the right advisors. Mm-hmm. So I go to 1 Kings 12 in the book to kind of flesh out the concept of a wisdom table. You have Rehoboam, who is Solomon's son. He's about to become king, and he consults a group of elders, which is a wise thing to do. Hey, how should I lead as I step into my kingship? They give him all of this advice that's brilliant. And the text says he dismisses those elders, and instead, at his wisdom table, he puts the boys that he grew up with at his wisdom table. Mm. And my point is, you can be Solomon's son and have access to a lot of wisdom. You can have access to these wise advisors. Listen, the people I grew up with are probably a lot of fun, but they might not need to be advising my life. And so I just say that your wisdom table, if you think about your life occurring across a set of tables, your wisdom table is the most important one. Depending on who you get at your wisdom table will affect how you do relationships, money, how you spend your time, whether you step into God's purpose for your life. And so I talk about how do you customize your own wisdom table, get someone around your table who can speak into your life. How do you engage your advisors? How do you regularly meet with them? What do you do when you need to dismiss someone from your wisdom table? So happy to talk more about any part of that, but it's a real passion of mine.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a whole study right there, I think. And so people can follow up with your website, benpilgreen.com, and of course the book, because we could go on another half hour on that, because I really do think that is huge, and it's missing in a lot of quarters, and in churches. We've seen the disaster when it's a bunch of good old boy yes men kind of situations.
Yes.
But I want to get to the $1 million question for most viewers who are stuck this far into the interview, and that is, how do I know what my spiritual gift is? Because people are that's I don't know. I kind of sometimes we can be obsessed with it to a fault, and I don't want to go that direction, but it's a valid question, right? So how do we even approach the question? Maybe that's the way to ask.
Yeah, I mean, there's a part of us that wished it was a formula. I don't think it's a formula. I also think I want to give some freedom here. I think we need to give ourselves, we put so much pressure to get it 100% like exact, like it's this little small bullseye pinpoint, it's like, it's just this. So a few thoughts. I think for starters, the first thing we need to do is daily be increasing our God awareness. If I have a creator, and I want to know what he's put me on earth to do, it probably would be a great idea to invest time, attention, and energy getting to know what this God is like. What does he care about? What is he up to in the world? How has he tend to call people to things throughout history? The second thing I want to do is increase my self-awareness. If this God has created me uniquely, who is the me that this God has created? So I'm paying attention to personality, passions. I think natural gifts are very interesting. To your point, you said when we came on, a lot of us, it's the hardest to see the gifts in ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so, Randy, when something comes easy to me, I think it comes easy to everyone.
Right.
And then you realize, wait a minute, no, this is a gift. So one question that may seem elementary, but it's really helpful is, hey, what can you do easier than most of us can do?
Yeah.
You take it for granted that you do it in your sleep, but for the rest of us, we'd have to have a coach and read 6 books to know how to do it, and you just wake up doing it. Right. So I think that's one way. And I think too, like, just get a general idea of what you're like. Like, I think you can narrow it. So we start off in life, especially adulthood, exploring. We think, I could do anything. And then you realize, nope, I can't do anything. I don't feel led to do anything. Mm-hmm. And you start narrowing it over time. But I think the Apostle Paul has a great sort of framework. He got the calling from God, and it was pretty clear to go and preach the gospel. But Paul didn't sit around waiting for God to tell him exactly what city to go to. He thought, well, if I'm supposed to spread the gospel, what are the most strategic cities I could go to? And he starts going. Mm. And then you get into Acts 16, and it says that he tried to go into certain places, and the Spirit of Jesus kept him from going in.
Yeah.
But you know what we do? We sit around waiting for 100% certainty. God's gonna write it in the sky, and we, all of us are called to wait on the Lord. But sometimes I think God is waiting on us. He's waiting on us to step out, and we're going, I don't have enough certainty. It's almost as if we're trying to remove the faith equation from our lives, and it's like Paul, when he was kept from going into that part of Asia, it said that very night was when he had the Macedonian dream. Mm. And then he woke up concluding, God must be calling me there. So let's just trust that we don't have to put a ton of pressure on ourselves, keep getting to know God, get to know ourselves, and step into opportunities. And God will make it. You think about Nehemiah. We do not read in his story that he got a verbal call from God to go to Jerusalem. What we see is when he gets word of the news that the city's broken down, its gates have been burned, it just says he sits down and weeps. Mm. And so sometimes we figure it out by asking this question: what is it that breaks your heart?
Mm, yeah.
What is it you can't get out of your mind?
Yeah.
And, sometimes what we do is like, we come to the church leader and go, hey, you guys need to do something about that. But God didn't break all of our hearts the way he broke your heart. My passion doesn't have to be your passion. So how about I can figure this out? And I think sometimes let's just try new things and see what resonates and begin to eliminate some things, or go, wow, what can I do that would bring God glory, impact others for good, and bring a sense of deep fulfillment to my life? I think those begin to give us some hints about what the thing God has for us to do while we're here on this earth.
Yeah. And, interesting when you talk about Paul receiving the calling, obeying, and acting on it, important, but also back to my point about the day-by-day dependency, because he could have been like, they won't let me in Asia, but God told me to go preach everywhere, and tried to beat the door down. but
Yeah.
that sensitivity of even laying down the gift and the calling on a daily basis to the authority of God, said, okay, he didn't go, which would seem almost counterintuitive. Like, God, you told me to, and now, so you're right, But again, that's back to that day-by-day dependency, even with that spiritual gift and that calling, which I think is interesting. Here's another question, though, that you raise an interesting point. What do you do with the failure? In other words, I've gotten this, I have this gift. I go out, I try to use it, it falls flat, that can end a lot of people. How do we need to approach when it doesn't seem to be working out? Do we keep going? Do we put our hand to the plow and never turn back? Or do we learn and pivot?
Yeah.
I mean, because that's where a lot of people get stuck.
Yeah, gosh, I think discernment on that is $1 million question, because there's times where it's like, hey, it's not effective and you probably don't need to do it. And to your point, there's other times where it's not effective yet. So I'm always thinking like, where's, so I think we need, some of us are too patient and some of us aren't patient enough.
Right.
And I think I need to be patient. Listen, and I think too, remember that we like to give ourselves a final grade every day, but that's not how God sees it. God is in this development process, and he's not just developing our talent and skills, he's developing our character.
Yeah.
So it's like, hey, and sometimes, listen, we don't have all control. Listen, I would love to sell 10 million books. That would be amazing.
Sure.
Is it going to happen? I mean, there would have to be a lot of miracles go down. And I would be thrilled about that. I want this message to get out. But I don't have control over that. What do I have control over? I have control over my part, which is to pray, to be obedient, to bring my best day after day. But God has a lot of part in this whole process. And so I'm trying to ask him, hey, is this something that you have for me? I believe the wisdom table, it's like, hey, I'm sensing that I'm supposed to do this with my life, but getting men and women around you that know you and know God and saying to them, hey, do you see this in me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you, I'm not on my own figuring this out. Do you see this in me, or am I way off base? Should I stay with this? Is there a slight pivot? Is there a full, like a 180 adjustment to what I need to pursue? So I think having those people in your life, and then just, we care so much about career trajectory, and I want to advocate that we should care more about our character trajectory.
I think, that's
huge. I don't want my talent to take me to a place where my character cannot sustain me. So if you become the right kind of person, you'll probably do the right kind of thing. If you don't become the right kind of person, does it even matter who you become?
Wow, man, you could just frame,
or what you do.
You could frame that one right there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's perspective shifting in a very godly, healthy way. All right, I'm going to give you the last word, but I want to show people your website real quick. This is benpilgreen.com. You can stop by there for all things Ben Pilgreen, and order the book from there as well if you want to follow up with this, because there's a lot. We're just kind of hitting a lot of surface, but this is good. This is deep.
Thank you.
Great topic, great insight. Final word. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, just for the person thinking, I'm not sure this is for me. We can think that we're too young or too old, or that we have failed too many times. I just want to remind you, God has put it in you. There's breath in your lungs. I want to encourage you to bring it out. That's what you've been put on this earth to do. And just know that God loves to resurrect dead dreams, and he loves to plant fresh dreams. So I believe one of those is for you. Either he wants to bring something back up or to bring something new to you so that he can bring it out of you for his glory and for the sake of the world.
Hear those words, people. Hear God's words, and then obey. And that we love formulas. The only formula I've ever found that's consistent that works is learn to hear his voice and then obey. And that does mean leaving the results to him, but that's okay. Yep. That's the character development. Whereas, like Ben says, we're oftentimes looking for sort of our career development or whatever success in whatever we're trying to do. But God's really more concerned about your character, conforming you to the image of Christ, he says is his goal. So let's let him do that. Wow. This is good. This has been good for me. I hope it's been good for you. And if you'd like it, leave a comment, a nice one, preferably. But hit the share button. Encourage someone else today. If you haven't liked, followed, or subscribed, I would invite you to do that. You'll get notifications of more encouraging, instructional interviews like this one. Come back. We've got more for you every day here on Life Today Live. We'll see you again next time.